Welcome to Case Files, the human factor. We are going to unpack and explore human behavior. And human behavior is fascinating. We're going to look at trauma, victimology, and I'm going to use all of my expertise over the last 25 years to really give you the gift of understanding human behavior and the fascination we've got with psychopathology, crime, victimology, criminal justice, mental health, forensics and statutory cases. And with that, I will, on my own and with the assistance of some of my guest speakers, really give you insight in what the human factor means in our lives and our daily existence. Welcome to the human factor. We are going to discuss today family assessment or child participation interviews and the child consultancy role. So throughout my career path, I've done a lot of work on divorce matters. So that is where the family assessment comes in. It's part of a divorce process when people go to the family court. Now, what is interesting to me, and I'll give you a bit of my history just academically, that you can see sort of where the family assessment comes in and the work that I've done on it. So I did a PhD specifically on parenting plans. So that was sort of my first sort of PhD, or my second PhD studies was on parenting plans. And parenting plans is in a divorce process. So what do parents do after a divorce? How does the parenting look? And in a process, it gets written down. That's now part of mediation. And then a parenting plan is formalized. So every parent understands what is their roles and responsibilities. So often in these kind of cases, when people file for divorce, it's a traumatic experience. So people, either one person feels blindsided and don't know the other person wants to leave, or there's a joint sort of discussion and people decide together that they don't want to be together. And so there's different ways that a divorce can unfold. The one common factor is definitely the human factor, and that is it is immensely traumatic. If that is because, yes, there may be relief if you want to leave, but it's still a traumatic experience because the family, as what you know it, disintegrate. And it creates a lot of feelings. It creates a whole different emotional sort of experience that people have not experienced before that haven't gone through a divorce process. And then what happens, especially if there's a court process, and often there is a court process because it's a legal binding sort of arrangement to be married, then you have to start going through quite a scrutinization of who you are as a person. And obviously there's also sort of you under a looking glass because people start looking at, but how have you parented? How is your children performing? What does your family look like? And that is often when one parent, or if it goes to court, there is an order of a family assessment to try and figure out, but okay, what do we do with this family system now going forwards post-divorce? Now, I see often that people come and see me and they don't know what to do. They feel absolutely terrified going into a family assessment. They feel very anxious, so their levels of anxiety and panic is higher than usual because they feel that they are going to be judged, or they feel that they have made a mistake and that is going to count against them. They feel that their children are being exposed to processes and now their children have to talk about their family. So a lot of worry around a family assessment process. So many people have asked me to speak about this topic just that they can feel that they've got an understanding of how should a family assessment process look like? What is it all about? Just that they can feel a bit more calm going into a court-ordered family assessment. Now, if we look at the process, often what happens is there's a disagreement. Otherwise, you wouldn't go through the process. Now, I've written a book that is called Divorce, What About the Children? And in this book, and this is an old book, so perhaps not that relevant anymore because things have changed, but some of the information is definitely still there of what is in the best interest of the child. And that is critical. And if we look at the Family Law Act, that is what we need to look at. But people get lost in the process. And often there is not a specific focus on, but what is really in the best interest of the child? Because it becomes an argument. People fight with each other. Parents fight with each other. They disagree about what is in the best interest of the child. Or there's a role change because now there's a separation and people want to do different things. So all of those things takes away from the critical aspect of what is truly in the best interest of the child. And what has happened, and it's different in different countries and in different jurisdictions, but there is sort of a global understanding that we need to hear what is the voice of the child. What is the child saying? What is in their best interest? What is their wishes? What is their needs? How do they see their life unfolding in the separation of their parents? And often historically, that was sort of pushed to the side. So the voice of the child in some countries were to some extent dismissed. And there's legislation shifts, and especially in Australia now, where it's been put to the forefront of, but what is the children saying? And one thing that I often hear is parents would come to me and say, but, when is a child old enough to be heard or to say what they want or what their needs are? Because there's a lot of conflicting information on that. Now, what is very important, and I would say that is the answer, is children should always have a voice. No matter their age or development, they should be considered in proceedings that affect them. Because in reality, their lives get hugely affected by the parents' decisions and by the court's decisions. So how do we resolve that issue? We start to listen carefully what children say. And when children speak up, we need expert interviewers to listen and to translate on paper in reports what children are saying. Now, often when this happens and when this process unfolds with either a child participation interview and the children are heard and there's a child consultant that interview the children and write a report, then often parents don't hear what they want to hear, so then they start to argue about the report writer. So there's just even a further acrimonious situation. But very important that as time unfolds and professionals sort of really know where to position themselves, and the position is a neutral, independent position as a child consultant and a family assessor, you provide that information to the court, to the family, of just a clear voice of what is the child saying. Has the voice been contaminated? Obviously, family assessors need expert education and skills to understand, is this the clear voice of the child? Or is the voice being contaminated by a parent saying, but you need to say this to the assessor. You need to tell them, because if you don't tell them this, you might be removed from me. Or you have to take my side. So often the assessor needs to evaluate, is this the clear voice of the child, or has the voice of the child been contaminated? Now, experts do know how to do that. They do have the skills to evaluate. But often that gets criticized by the person that may not feel happy with the assessment results. So very important that experts really provide information that comes from the family, that is evaluated through a lens of expertise, evidence-based process, to really put forward to the court what is in the best interest, first and foremost, for the child and then the wider family system. And that is what we want to see in family assessments. Now, as what I've said earlier, family assessments can be very tricky because people's emotions are high. It runs high because they feel they're in fight or flight mode. So they're not always the best version of themselves. And that is what you see people say after a family assessment, but I made mistakes. I was shortcut. There wasn't enough time. I have to sort of tell all of the stories my whole life. I have to condense in a few hours. So people need to really go and think, what do I bring to a family assessment? And the best strategy is to just be yourself. Just try and sort of calm down as far as what you can. It is a stressful situation. Remember, the assessor knows how stressful it is for the families. Now, often because assessors are neutral as well in nature and they're independent, they're not overly friendly or they're not overly warm in these assessment processes. And that can be quite off-putting for the client because they feel, oh, this is cold, this is very clinical, and all that I want to do is I want to sit and tell my story in a therapeutic way nearly. And it's important to remember it's not a therapeutic session. It's a very clinical forensic session where the information is put down and sort of analyzed. It's being first of all, it's being taken from the client, then it's being placed on paper. It's perhaps seen through an empirical lens and analyzed, and then the report writer writes everyone's views. Now, the typical process, just that people know, and they often go and read about it, but assessors also do things differently. So you might feel surprised because now you've read one thing of this is what you expect, and then the family assessors say, no, but this is now a different process. So the typical process that people can expect to happen, just that you can prepare yourself, is the family assessor would receive correspondence from, or they will receive the court order, or they will get an instruction from the attorneys, the solicitors, that we need a family assessment on the family. They will then consider if they've got space, and family assessors are often quite busy because it is quite a expertise. It's a very special niche field. So there isn't a lot of family assessors available. So often now people that are already stressed have to wait for months and months for this family assessment process to take place. So what will happen is the family assessor will then provide a letter to say, but I can see you and the other side in a month or 2 or 6 months, and sometimes even in a year. And they will explain when they can see the parties and their process. Now, the process of the interviews are often, and I'll get to that point when there is more of a risk analysis and there's family violence, but it's often a case where there's an interview with the mother, an interview with the father, an interview with the child or the children individually, and there can be observation sessions, what they call interactional analysis sessions, where the mom and the children sit together, and then separately they will see the children again then with the father, and they will look at the observations, the interaction between the children and the parent. Now, often in these sessions, the assessor will ask you to do a task. So they'll ask you, depending on the development of the child, you will have to do something in this office where you either have games available to you, or you do drawings with the child, or there's a conversation that you have with the child. But it's quite scripted and contrived. So people feel, oh, now I have to do this, or I don't know which game to choose, or what if I make a mistake? Once again, try and just be as natural as possible in a very difficult sort of situation. Obviously, an interview, someone is sitting there with a clipboard and making notes in the corner while you're trying to have this relationship with your child. But just a natural, warm sort of tone is always good to really show what does your relationship with your child really look like in real life outside of this office. But very stressful, often for the child and the parent, because they feel watched and observed. That is not a natural process obviously in real life when you're out there really parenting. But that is what the process offers. So that is normally what happens. And the sessions can vary in time depending on the children's age. It can be shorter sessions with younger kids, and obviously longer sessions depending on the developmental phase of the child. Now, the next question is also, but now my children have to go and see these people, like a total stranger. How do I prepare my child for that? Now, what is often in the best interest of the children is that they feel that their voice will be heard. So that is where the parent needs to explain without influencing the child that, mom and dad is going through a separation. And this is the process where you get an opportunity to sit with mom and dad separately and sort of just have a conversation that the person can see how our relationship looks like. And in the individual session that you have, the person may give you a questionnaire, or they can play a few games, or they might you to draw certain things, just that they can have a glimpse of how your life looks and what you want for your future, what your needs are, or what your wishes may be. So it is a space where you can freely speak about how you've experienced the separation, your family before the separation, and how you see your life going forward. So that is normally and typically what a parent should say when a child asks, or when you prepare a child to go into a family assessment or a child interview. What parents should be doing or should not be doing is to try and motivate the child to take your side, or to try and imprint certain ideas on the child, or to suggest. And often that is the case, and we can pick it up in assessments, because the child will come into the session and often say, but my dad says, or my mom says, or there's an alignment with the parent, and you can hear that the child has been set up in this interview to try and get said what the child knows that that parent wants. So very important, and we know how stressful these processes is, but conditioning, imprintment, and trying to suggest to children what to say in these processes do come out, and the family assessor can pick up and will then note that to the court, that this child speaks through a conditioned voice. And that obviously is not in the interest of any party, because we want an interview with all the parties where they can just say freely what their experience is and what they would like their life to look like post-separation or post-divorce. So free, non-suggestible and no suggestions, and not conditioned or coached or brainwashed even, is definitely an approach that is a good approach when you're entering a process like that. Now, what is more beneficial is when you feel anxious or nervous about the process, is to rather go and see parallel to this process a therapist or a counselor or a clinician that can assist you managing your stress, that you can rather speak to them about these things rather than having family conversations about it or speaking to your children about it, because the less children are exposed to these processes and discussions, the better it is for them in any case, long run, with regards to their mental health. We don't want to expose children unnecessarily to court processes, to assessments, or to over-interview children, because that is definitely not in the best interest of the children and their mental health. It's also important for parents to understand that children have got human rights. Children have got children's rights. That is why there is the right to the child to be heard, the right to respect the child's views and wishes, the right for a child to understand how their life is going to look like, and a right for a child to understand and give voice when they are affected by legal processes. So it's often, and it's nearly seldom, a child that will activate legal processes. It's parents that activate a legal process, and then their children are just involved in this process. But when children are involved in legal proceedings that affects their life, very important that children have a say, that they can feel that they're empowered in this process, that they have voice. And that is what we want to see in family assessments and in child consultancy process, is what is the voice of the child and what should the parents listen to and what should the courts listen to when it comes to the interests of children. So the next question that I often get, but how is these things structured? Because now it's like squashed into one day and we all sit there in one day and just sort of get interviewed back to back. Now, often in these processes, there's no ideal circumstances. It very much depends on the practitioner's diary. So often it is, a person has got availability over 2 days, so all of the sessions takes place over the 2 days. It depends on urgency. It depends on how quickly that report needs to go to court. And sometimes it just depends on administration and someone's diary. So there's no specific way, there's no specific right way. Now, often after an assessment where there's results that some people are not happy about, they start to criticize the process. That's the go-to. And they get the assistance of their solicitors to start criticizing the professional. So now it is, but you didn't do the interview properly, or you should have asked specific questions, or it was leading questions, or the report writing is faulty. So there's a lot of criticism on the report writer and the assessor, especially when people are not happy with the assessment results. And once again, we need to look at the adversarial process that unfolds around that now again. Very important to start thinking, but what is really in the best interest of the family? Let's look at this family assessment through a lens where this family assessor is not out to get anyone. They're neutral, they're independent. There is no benefit for a family assessor or a child consultant to take one parent's side. For them, it is literally to just take the information, put it down on paper, review it empirically with evidence-based methodologies, and to put that in front of the court or the solicitors to know what is in the interest of the child and the family. So be careful that you don't have a just instantaneous sort of response where you start to criticize. When you get the family report, and remember now there's a time frame, so you go for this family assessment, and then the report can come a week, 2 weeks, or months after that assessment process. So what happens to a person? Obviously, you start to feel anxious. You start to doubt yourself. You start to think, oh, what did I say? I should have said this. You start to faulty think. You start to have cognitive distortions. All of these things happen. And what happens often is when your anxiety levels raise, you start to overthink, you start to panic. And then when this report comes, and you see things that you don't like, or you look at the child interview and the child interview starts to talk about you not being always a great parent, or some of the mistakes that you may have made as a parent, or that the child may want to stay with the other parent more than the other parent, you start to become reactive. You start to become more hostile. You start to become more adversarial. And you have discussions with your solicitors, and solicitors are instructed by the clients to to do certain things. Be very careful in that process that you don't push a process that is more adversarial, more harmful, more hurtful to the family unit, because it does have long-term ramifications. Obviously, there is cases where family assessments may be faulty or mistakes, or, that's where the human factor comes in. The family assessors are also only human. In those kind of cases, it is good to go and get advice. It is good to go and reflect upon the family assessment and just to think, what is the best strategy moving forwards then? that serves the family in a case where there might be faulty information. But to have just a reactive response that may be more harmful than helpful is not good for the children or for the parents in these cases. And that is where you start seeing that people go from one practitioner to another, or they object, or they don't want to use the family assessment in court. So very important to manage your behavior and to be as true to yourself and not to further promote hostility, negativity, and aggression. Now, if we start looking at high-risk family dynamics and high-risk family violence cases, there's a lot of movement in the right direction and to assist and to protect families that need to go through a family assessment process where the family feels safe. So especially where there's intervention orders as well, very important. If there's an intervention order, or when there was domestic violence or family violence, or that a parent is at risk or children are at risk, to give that information to the family assessor, that the family assessor knows how to structure their process around the risk factors. So when I am referred a family assessment, my first question is there a history of family violence? Is there a risk is there fear-based feelings? Is there risk factors that I need to consider when I structure this family assessment? Because we have to be very mindful when we work in the family law space and when we work with children about not putting children and families at unnecessary emotional risk, physical risk, or risk of further injury or crime. So very important that everyone that brings a family assessment or to a child consultant or a family assessor to be very transparent about the risk factors, because then the assessor can manage that risk throughout the family assessment. Now, what is important for me as a family assessor as well is that people feel as safe as possible at the assessment, in the assessment space and within the process, that it's not even more stressful and that it does not create even further risk to the person that comes in a very vulnerable state to this family assessment. So very important that we as family assessors also look at our own risk analysis at our practices. Is there 2 exits where people can exit safe? Can you escort them, for example, out of the building? How would your reception be set up in a high conflict divorce dispute if 2 parents need to be at the same place at a handover of children? Should the 2 people be at the practice together? Those are all very important questions for the assessors to ask themselves, that they can create their assessment space in the best interest of the family that you are assessing. So also very important that all of that information is provided to the solicitors and the family, that the family does not unnecessarily stress and feel anxious coming just to the assessment process. So it's already stressful. We don't want to increase the risk. We definitely not want to increase safety issues. We want to really make sure that people are safe and secure and supported when they come to family assessments, that we can give them an opportunity to speak freely, to provide sort of us the information that they need to, that they feel safe and secure to do that away from risk. And especially with children, in an abuse case as well, that children are given an opportunity to freely express themselves and give voice to their wishes, their needs, their own safety concerns, that can be reported to the court, that the court can make the necessary decisions with regards to children's safety. So very important. So I think what is important for us just in closing is that to just acknowledge that when you go through a process like that, it's important that you sit with your solicitor and you consider what is in the best interest of children, what is in the best interest of your children, to try and understand the process and not to fight the process, and to try and give as much information about sort of your family system as possible that can help the family assessor. If the family assessor has got a questionnaire as well, and they're very specific and structured in the questions that they ask, answer the questions and just give the information that the assessor asks. They will give you an opportunity to speak freely about further concerns that you may have. And also, very important to bring the safety concerns to the assessor, that they can consider that as well before the assessment, but also within the assessment, that they can write the best possible professional report for the court, that the court can consider the report and the content of the report, and especially the voice of the child, that the court can consider. But what is this child saying about their life, what they need, how they their experiences, where they're at developmentally, how their life looks like, because it's important for the court to consider the child's views, to consider the child's world. I've developed sort of assessment tools as well to help the child, play out their world without talking too much, but just putting it out on a magnetic board that I can see their world. I want to understand their views. I want to be part of their world, that I can really get a good understanding how the child's worlds look like, that I can sort of provide that information to the court. So for the management of stress and anxiety, very important during a family assessment to try and create a stress-free environment at home as far as possible, because we do know it's a part of your life, a phase of your life that is very stressful. It's very invasive as well, and it can feel very, you may feel attacked and observed and criticized during that process. That is not the intention, but it may feel like that. So very important to look after your own mental health and that of your children while going through a dispute, especially a high conflict dispute, and especially perhaps where there's a dispute with someone where there's personality disorders or where there is safety risk. That is very, very traumatic, going through a process like that. And I see that often in clinical work, where patients come back where they say, this was the most stressful experience of my whole life. I've never gone through it. I've even, lost someone, or I've had, childhood trauma, but this experience has really shaken me. So very important to look after your own mental health and that of your family, and getting a village to support you through that difficult time. Also very important to remember is that you can choose your solicitor and do your homework. People often go into processes and they sit with solicitors where they have perhaps instructed the wrong person, and then they just sort of go and it becomes a snowball effect. Very important to calmly and rationally decide who do you want to represent, who do you want someone to represent you, and that there's a value system that align. I do think it's easy to make mistakes in who to instruct, and life happens. And sometimes you just instruct someone because they're available, or because of fees, or because it's a free service. We don't always have the capacity to always just pick and choose, but try and choose as carefully as what you can, because obviously the longer the case goes on, you have to work with these people, and it is your life. And more importantly, it is the life of your children. So very important to go and consider who you instruct. And if you get to a point where you feel that your value system do not align, is to rather look at instructing someone else where there's a shared value system. It comes with tribulations, it comes with problems when you change solicitors, but you need to listen to your gut, because otherwise you can pay a very expensive price for that in the long term. But It's a very complicated and difficult and stressful phase of a person's life. You can just do the best that you can, but just important to follow the process and to be true to yourself and show the best version of yourself, that your anxieties and your stress doesn't cover sort of who you are as a person. And very important also to look after the mental health of your children through that process, to do nice things, have good family time in this process, and to just live the best possible sort of life that you can during a very complicated phase of your life. And just remember, you are only human. You know, it's a developmental phase. It's a tragic phase for a lot of people in their life. For some people, it's a very releasing and freeing phase because they come from a place of trauma or abuse, but it's still a difficult phase of your life that you need to navigate to the best of your ability. And often it is helpful if you are lucky and you've got a family support structure, or if you can get the support of a therapist or your community, and to go on with your life to the best of your ability, balancing your life with healthy activities, mental health support, and healthy habits is a very good idea when you go through this challenging phase of being in court and going through an investigation process, perhaps a forensic process or a family assessment. So remember, there's a lot of factors, a lot of human aspects surrounding these processes, a lot of mistakes that can be made, but very important that you just take one day at a time and take it step by step, because that is helpful and that is the only way. So thank you for listening to the Human Factor on family assessments, child consultancy work, and the Family Law Act and the court work with regards to the best interests of the children. It's something that you really need to consider, is to remain focused on the best interests of the child when you go through a process like that.